My name is Elizabeth Holloway. For 40 years, I was a research chemist, a woman who understood that the world is governed by precise, immutable laws. I believed in data, in methodology, in the cold, clear, and unimpeachable logic of a controlled experiment. I never imagined that my own family would become the subject of an experiment so monstrous it defied all reason. After my brilliant daughter-in-law, Isabella, had me placed in a nursing home under the guise of loving concern for my failing mind, I began a quiet investigation from my lonely room. I hired a private detective, and what he uncovered was not a story of natural decline and familial care. It was the meticulously documented, horrifying truth of a plot to slowly, scientifically poison my husband with methanol, and to use my own supposed senility as the perfect cover for a perfect murder. Before the chaos that was Isabella, my life was a quiet composition of intellectual order. Our home, a beautiful, historic colonial in a quiet, leafy suburb of Philadelphia, was a sanctuary of learning and love. It was the house my husband, Arthur, and I had filled with a lifetime of books, art, and the comfortable, layered memories of a 45-year marriage. Arthur, a retired but still brilliant literature professor, was the heart of our home. I, the retired chemist, was its mind. We were a perfect, complementary pair. Since my retirement from the pharmaceutical company where I had led a research division, my days had fallen into a comfortable rhythm. Mornings were for my greenhouse, a place of precise, controlled beauty where I cultivated rare and exotic plants. Afternoons were for my correspondence with former colleagues, for reading journals, for the quiet, satisfying pursuit of knowledge. Our world was small, but it was precise, and it made sense. Our only son, David, was a good man, but he was a watercolor in a world of oils. A gentle, artistic soul. He had drifted through life, a man of great sensitivity but little practical ambition. He was the one variable in our orderly lives, a source of both immense love and a quiet, constant worry. He was a man in need of an anchor, and his choice of one would prove to be the catastrophic, defining event of all our lives. David met Isabella at a university function. He brought her home to meet us, and it was like introducing a new, dazzlingly potent, and entirely unknown chemical compound into a stable solution. Isabella was a masterpiece of creation. A former pharmaceutical researcher with a string of impressive publications, she was not just beautiful. She was luminous, with a mind that was as sharp and brilliant as a cut diamond. She was flawless. She discussed organic chemistry with me, with an expertise that was, frankly, superior to my own. She debated postmodern literary theory with Arthur with a passion and an intellect that clearly captivated him. She looked at our son, David, not with the gentle condescension he so often received, but with a look of profound belief in his untapped artistic potential. "You have built such an incredible life of the mind here," she said to Arthur and me on that first evening. "It is an honor to be in this house." She did not just win us over. She conquered us with her charm, her brilliance, and her apparent devotion to our son. She seemed to be the catalyst he had been missing his entire life. Under her influence, he began to paint again, his work taking on a new confidence and power. My gratitude for her was immense. She was not just a daughter-in-law. She was the answer to a lifetime of quiet prayers for my son's happiness. They married and moved into our home, a practical arrangement that seemed to make perfect sense. And then, the slow, creeping, and masterfully executed campaign began. It was a campaign of loving concern. Arthur, in his late 70s, had the usual collection of minor, age-related ailments, high blood pressure, a touch of arthritis. In Isabella's hands, these were magnified into a narrative of his increasing frailty. She took over the management of his health with a terrifying, scientific efficiency. "Arthur's medication regimen is far too complex for him to manage on his own anymore," she would say. her face a mask of wifely devotion. "And Beatrice, my love," she would add, turning to me. "You have enough to worry about. Let me take this burden." She created a wellness plan for him, which included a special vitamin and nutrient cocktail she would mix for him every morning. A foul-smelling concoction she claimed was based on her own advanced pharmaceutical research. At the same time, she began her assault on me. It was a campaign of 1,000 tiny teak, almost imperceptible cuts. It started with the gaslighting. "Oh, Beatrice, you paid the electric bill twice last month," she would say with a gentle, chiding smile, showing me a forged document. "Your memory is getting a little bit tricky, is it not?" She would move my reading glasses and then help me find them in an absurd place. She would remind me of conversations that had never happened. She was an artist, and my mind was her canvas. She was painting a portrait of me as a woman in decline, a woman of fading faculties, of growing confusion. And she was doing it with such skill, with such loving concern, that even I began to see the resemblance. David, completely under her spell, became her primary instrument. His genuine love and concern for us, twisted into a tool for her agenda. With the narrative of our joint decline now firmly established, Isabella presented the solution. She called a family meeting. In her face, a carefully composed portrait of solemn, familial responsibility. "I have been doing a deep dive into the finances," she began, her voice calm and authoritative. "And the reality is, with Arthur's escalating medical needs and Beatrice's increasing confusion, this house has become a burden. It is a source of stress and a financial liability we cannot afford." She said, found the perfect answer. A highly rated, exclusive assisted living facility just outside the city. It was beautiful, with gardens and a library and round-the-clock medical staff. "It would be a fresh start for you, Beatrice," she said, her voice a silken web of logic and love. "A place where you can be safe, where you will not have to worry about a thing. It will allow you to rest. And it will allow me to focus all of my energy on Arthur's care, here at home." It was a brilliant, monstrous pitch. She was not casting me out. She was liberating me. She was not taking my home. She was freeing me from its burdens. My refusal was immediate and visceral, but it was met by a united, sorrowful front. "Mom," David pleaded, his eyes full of a genuine, manipulated pain. "We are only doing this because we love you. We cannot live with the constant worry. Please, do this for us. Do this for Dad." Arthur, whose own health and mind had been steadily undermined for months by his wife's care, was too tired, too confused to fight. "Perhaps they are right, my dear," he said to me, his voice weak. "Perhaps it is for the best." I was outvoted. I was outmaneuvered. My resistance was framed as the final, definitive proof of my own senility. The day they took me to the Brookdale Senior Living Facility was the darkest of my life. The facility was exactly as she had described it, beautiful, elegant, and soulless. It was a gilded cage. I was shown to a lovely, sun-filled room with a view of a manicured lawn. The door closed behind me, and I was a prisoner. My first few weeks were a blur of shock and profound, bottomless grief. I had been surgically removed from my own life. My home, my husband, my son all gone. My protests to the staff were met with a calm, therapeutic pity. "It is a difficult transition, Elizabeth," the director would say, patting my hand. "Your daughter-in-law has given us a very thorough history of your condition. We are here to help." They had my medical records. The fraudulent file of lies Dr. Finch, a corrupt psychiatrist in Isabella's pocket, had helped her create. I was a diagnosed schizophrenic. My truth was a symptom of my disease. My only contact with the outside world was through weekly, supervised phone calls with my family. David would talk about his art, his voice full of a strained, guilty cheerfulness. And he would talk about his father. Arthur's decline, he reported with a heavy sadness, was accelerating. His memory was almost completely gone. He had episodes of confusion, of agitation. And then, he mentioned a new, strange symptom. "It is the oddest thing," David said, his voice full of a clinical curiosity he had no doubt picked up from his wife. "His vision has started to go. He says all the colors look faded, washed out. The doctors are baffled. And in my quiet, beige room, hundreds of miles from my laboratory, a lifetime of chemical knowledge, of toxicological data, of the known, observable effects of certain organic compounds on the human nervous system, suddenly coalesced into a single fort, terrifying, an utterly certain point of light. Faded colors, confusion, memory loss, optic nerve damage. I knew those symptoms. They were not the signs of old age. They were the classic, textbook signs of slow, chronic methanol poisoning. My husband was not dying. He was being murdered. My diagnosis, the chilling, impossible truth I had arrived at through the cold, hard logic of chemistry, changed everything. The Brookdale Senior Living Facility, which had been the symbol of my defeat, was now a prison I had to escape. The elegant, sun-filled room was a cell. The kind, a smiling staff were my wardens, and every tick of the clock was a countdown to my husband's death. But my face, my voice, my actions could betray none of this. My awakening had to remain my most closely guarded secret. I knew, with the certainty of a scientist who understands the variables of an experiment, that my only chance was to become an even more convincing version of the character they had written for me. I had to be the frail, forgetful, and utterly defeated Elizabeth Holloway. My survival, and Arthur's, depended on my performance. So I leaned into the role. I became more withdrawn. I would forget the names of the nurses. I would sit in the common room, staring blankly at the television, a perfect portrait of a woman lost in a senile fog. The pitying, condescending looks I received from the staff were a bitter pill to swallow, but they were also the shield behind which I began to formulate my plan. I was no longer a patient. I was a deep cover operative, and my first mission was to find a weakness in the system, a crack in the wall of my gilded cage. Isabella visited me twice a week, a flawless performance of the devoted, grieving daughter-in-law. She would arrive bearing bouquets of my favorite flowers and a torrent of sad, loving updates on Arthur. Her performance was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. "He misses you so much, Elizabeth," she would say, her beautiful eyes welling with convincing tears. "But his decline, it is happening so fast. The doctors are still baffled. He has good days and bad days. He asks for you on the good days, but he is often so confused." I would listen, my heart a cold, hard knot in my chest, and I would play my part. "My poor Arthur," I would whisper, my own eyes filling with tears that were all too real. But as I watched her, my chemist's mind was at work, observing, analyzing. I saw the tiny, almost imperceptible tells of a liar. The way her eyes would dart to the side when she spoke of his symptoms. The slight tremor in her hand when she mentioned the doctors. She was not a grieving wife. She was a bad actress, and I was the only one in the world who knew it. It was during her visit on a Friday afternoon. Asterisk, asterisk, October 4, 2025. Asterisk, asterisk, that she delivered the next calculated blow. She held my hand, her face a mask of profound, sorrowful practicality. "Elizabeth," she began, her voice a gentle, apologetic whisper. "We have a serious problem. As you know, the cost of this facility is staggering. And the experimental medications I have been sourcing for Arthur, they are draining our savings. There is no other way. I have to list the house for sale." She presented it as a tragic necessity, a final, heartbreaking sacrifice for Arthur's care. "The listing goes live today," she said, squeezing my hand. "It is the only way we can continue to give him the best of everything." I looked at her, and I saw not a loving caregiver, but a thief, calmly and rationally explaining why she had to burn down my life to keep herself warm. And I had to sit there, nodding, a single tear tracing a path down my cheek, and thank her for being so strong. I knew I could not fight her alone. I was trapped, my communications monitored, my credibility destroyed. I needed an agent on the outside. I needed a weapon. My mind, working with a clarity I had not felt in months, began to search for a solution. I found it in the unlikeliest of places. He was a young orderly named Leo, a kind, gentle boy in his early 20s, working his way through college. He was one of the few staff members who spoke to me not as a patient, but as a person. He would ask me about my past, about my work as a chemist, his eyes full of a bright, genuine curiosity. He reminded me of my own son, David, before the world, and Isabella, had corrupted him. I decided to take a calculated risk. One evening, as he was delivering my bedtime medication, the antipsychotics I had been hiding under my tongue and spitting out for weeks, I put my plan into motion. I gave him a sealed envelope. Inside was a short, cryptic letter and 5 $100 bills. Cash I had insisted on keeping in my purse when I was admitted. "Leo," I whispered, my voice a conspiratorial, trembling plea. "This is a very important, very private letter to an old family friend, my daughter-in-law. She means well, but she worries so much she handles all my mail. But this is a secret, a surprise for my husband. Can you do me a great favor and mail this for me from a public mailbox, and not mention it to anyone? This money is for your trouble." He saw the desperation in my eyes, the wad of cash in my hand, and the simple, harmless story of a sentimental old woman. "Of course, Mrs. Holloway," he said with a warm, kind smile. "It will be our little secret." The letter was not to a family friend. It was addressed to the one man in Philadelphia I knew could navigate the dark, ugly world of deceit and betrayal, a private investigator named Frank Chen. He was a man with a reputation for being tenacious, discreet, and utterly ruthless. A man my late husband's law firm had used for their most difficult, sensitive cases. The letter contained only a few desperate lines. Asterisk, "My name is Elizabeth Holloway. My husband, Arthur, is being murdered. I am being held here against my will. I believe his wife is poisoning him. I have a scientific basis for this suspicion. I need your help. I will pay any price." Asterisk. It was a message in a bottle, thrown from the shore of my own private, desolate island. The days after I sent the letter were the most agonizing of my life. I had acted. But now, I had to wait. And while I waited, my husband was dying. My weekly, supervised phone calls with him were a form of exquisite torture. His voice was growing weaker, his thoughts more jumbled. "Lizzie," he would say, using his old pet name for me. "Is that you? The light, it is so dim today. I cannot see your face clearly in my mind." The methanol was doing its work, destroying his optic nerves, plunging his mind into a permanent twilight, and I had to listen to it happen. My own scientific knowledge, a curse that allowed me to understand every agonizing detail of his slow, methodical execution. I had to sit there, in my comfortable, beige prison, and make cheerful, meaningless small talk, my heart screaming with a silent, helpless rage. The doubt was a constant, gnawing companion. What if the orderly had thrown the letter away? What if the investigator thought it was the ravings of a madwoman, the very story Isabella had so carefully crafted? What if help never came? What if it came too late? The pain of my impotence was a far greater torment than any prison could ever be. I was a scientist who had identified the poison, but I was locked in a cage, forced to watch as it slowly, inexorably, killed the person I loved most in the world. Help arrived on a Tuesday, not with a bang, but with a quiet, professional knock on my door. A man I had never seen before stood there, dressed in a sharp suit, a bouquet of roses in his hand. "Aunt Elizabeth," he said, his voice a calm, low baritone. "It is me, your nephew, Robert, from Seattle. I was in town for business and had to stop by. I had no nephew named Robert. This had to be him." Frank Chen was a man in his 50s, his face impassive, his eyes missing nothing. The nurses, seeing a loving nephew visiting his dear old aunt, left us alone in the facility's beautiful, sun-drenched garden. We sat on a bench, a perfect portrait of a family reunion. I played my part, the slightly dotty but delighted old woman. He played his, the caring, attentive nephew. And in low, quiet voices, we planned a war. I laid out the scientific basis for my suspicion of methanol poisoning with a cold, logical precision that left no room for doubt. I described the symptoms, the timeline, the motive. He was convinced. He had seen cases like this before. "They think they are so clever," he said, his voice a low, grim hum. "They use these slow-acting compounds that mimic the symptoms of old age. It is a classic play." He laid out his plan. It was simple and urgent. First, he needed proof. He needed a sample of Arthur's special vitamin cocktail for analysis. Second, he needed a sample of Arthur's blood, taken independently of the hospital and Isabella's control. Third, he would begin a full, deep dive background and financial investigation into Isabella. "This will be difficult," he warned. "But we will get it. Your job is the hardest of all. You must continue to do nothing. You must be the frail, harmless old woman in the nursing home. Let her believe she has won. Let her get careless." While Frank began his secret, silent work, the world outside my gilded cage continued to move toward its tragic, seemingly inevitable conclusion. The house sold. A cash buyer had materialized with an offer that was, Isabella told me on the phone, too good to refuse. The closing was scheduled. My last conversation with my son, David, was the final, devastating blow that almost broke me completely. I tried, one last, desperate time, to reach him. "David," I said, my voice pleading, "please, just listen to me. Something is wrong. Your father is not just sick. Isabella." "Mom, stop." He cut me off, his voice not angry, but filled with a profound, weary sadness that was infinitely worse. "Please, just stop. I cannot do this anymore. Isabella is a saint. She is sacrificing everything for him, for us, and all you can do is attack her. The doctors at Brookdale say your delusions are getting worse. I love you, Mom, but I cannot listen to this. I have to go." He hung up. The click of the phone was the sound of a door slamming shut, a final, definitive end to the hope that I could ever reach him. That night, a call came from the hospital. It was a weeping, hysterical David. Arthur had had a major setback. He had been hospitalized. He was in critical condition. I sat in my sterile, silent room, the phone in my hand, and the last of my strength, my hope, my very will to fight, crumbled into dust. Frank's investigation, our careful plan, it was all too slow. The poison had won. The experiment was reaching its fatal conclusion. I was too late. I had failed him. And in that moment, in the face of that absolute, crushing despair, I truly, and for the first time, felt completely and utterly mad. Despair is a quiet room with no doors. For the 2 days following the news of Arthur's hospitalization, I existed in that room. I did not eat. I did not speak. I sat in the chair by the window of my opulent prison cell and watched the world outside move on. A world I was no longer a part of. My plan had failed. I was too late. The brilliant, rational mind of the chemist had been defeated by the simple, brutal fact of my own powerlessness. The knock on my door was a sound I barely registered, an orderly I did not recognize. A young man with a serious face entered with my untouched lunch tray. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, his voice a low, professional murmur. "You need to eat to keep your strength up." He set the tray down, but as he did, his hand brushed mine, and I felt a folded piece of paper being pressed into my palm. He looked at me, his eyes holding mine for a single, significant second, and then he turned and left without another word. My heart, which had felt like a cold, dead stone in my chest, gave a sudden painful lurch. My trembling fingers fumbled with the note. It was a single, typed sentence. Asterisk. The letter was delivered. "He is on the case. We have a beachhead. Stay strong. F. C." Frank Chen, the investigator. The kind orderly, Leo, had not failed me. My message in a bottle had reached the shore. It was not a guarantee of rescue. It was not a promise of victory, but it was a flicker of light in the profound, absolute darkness. It was a sign that the war was not over. It was a command to fight. And in that moment, the grieving, defeated widow died. And the cold, methodical, and now utterly ruthless chemist was reborn. The waiting was still a form of torture, but now it was a purposeful waiting. I began to eat again. I walked in the garden. I played the part of the gentle, confused woman with a renewed, secret vigor. I was no longer just a victim. I was a soldier, holding a defensive position, waiting for my general to send orders from the front. The orders came a week later. Frank Chen returned, once again in the guise of my nephew Robert. He found me in the sunny, public garden, and we sat on a bench. A perfect portrait of a family visit. "I have the preliminary reports," he murmured, his voice a low hum that was barely audible over the chirping of the birds, while his face was arranged in a smile of fond, familial affection. "You were right, Elizabeth, about everything." He passed me a thin file, disguised as a collection of family photos. Inside were the lab reports. My hands shook as I read them. The first was the analysis of a water bottle Frank had managed to retrieve from the trash at my house, a bottle that had contained Arthur's tonic. The results were conclusive, a significant, non-lethal, but chronically toxic concentration of methanol. The second report was even more damning. Posing as a phlebotomist from a private lab, Frank had managed to get a blood sample from Arthur at the hospital. His blood was saturated with the metabolites of methanol poisoning. It was the smoking gun. Undeniable. Scientific proof. "There is more," Frank whispered. He showed me the next page. It was a financial profile of Isabella. It was a disaster of high-interest loans, failed investments, and, most chillingly, massive gambling debts owed to a less than reputable offshore casino. She was hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. He also found the life insurance policy she had taken out on Arthur just after his health began to decline. A policy worth $2 million. The motive was not just greed. It was sheer, suffocating desperation. She was not just trying to get rich. She was trying to save herself. "We have the what, and we have the why," Frank said, his voice a low, grim whisper. "Now we need to get the who in her own words. We need to get inside that house. We need to hear her confess." "That is impossible," I said. "I am trapped here, and the house is a fortress. She trusts no one." "She trusts your son," he countered. David is our only way in. We have to turn him. The thought was a painful one. To bring my own, deeply manipulated and complicit son into this dangerous conspiracy. He will not believe me. I said. He thinks I am insane. He will not believe you. Frank agreed. But he might believe a lab report. We need to get this evidence to him. Without Isabella knowing. We need to give him the choice to become either a co-conspirator in a murder plot or the man who saves his father's life. We decided to use the same, unlikely channel I had used before. That evening, I called for the young orderly, Leo. This time, the envelope I gave him was thicker, and the cash I pressed into his hand was more substantial. Inside the envelope was a copy of the toxicology report on Arthur's blood, and a short, brutal, and clinical letter I had written, not as a mother, but as a scientist. Asterisk David. Asterisk. The letter began. Asterisk. Your wife is not caring for your father. She is poisoning him. The enclosed document is a chemical analysis of his blood. It shows lethal levels of a slow-acting poison, methanol. His symptoms are not old age. They are the direct result of what she is putting in his tonic every day. You have been an unwitting accomplice to a slow, methodical murder plot. The proof is in your hands. What you do next will determine whether your father lives or dies. The choice is yours. It was the most difficult, and the most important, letter I had ever written. I had to trust that the son I had raised, the good, kind boy buried beneath the layers of guilt and manipulation, was still in there somewhere. The 2 days that followed were the longest of my life. I had no way of knowing if the letter had been delivered, or if David had read it, or how he had reacted. I was living on a knife's edge of hope and terror. The answer came during my next supervised phone call with David. His voice was different. The strained, guilty cheerfulness was gone. He sounded terrified. Mom, he said, his voice a low, urgent whisper. I got it. I read it. Oh God. Mom, is it true? Yes, I whispered back, tears of relief streaming down my face. Every word. What do I do? He pleaded, his voice cracking. She is everywhere. She watches him every second. Listen to me, David, I said, my own voice, now a firm, clear command. You do nothing. You say nothing. You continue to play your part. You are her loving, supportive, and completely ignorant husband, and you wait for instructions. My son, my lost, broken son, had finally come home. He was now a soldier in our secret army, an ally in the heart of the enemy's camp. With David on our side, the floodgates of evidence opened. He became our inside man, our spy, following Frank's discreet, encrypted instructions. He planted the surveillance devices we had only dreamed of deploying. A new digital clock, a gift from David to Isabella for her home office, a new phone charger for the living room. Our eyes and ears were now inside the fortress. The evidence we gathered was a daily torrent of their depravity. We recorded Isabella on the phone with her creditors, her voice a mixture of arrogance and desperation, promising them a massive payout from Arthur's life insurance, very, very soon. We captured her speaking with the corrupt Dr. Finch, complaining that the poisoning was taking too long and asking if there was a way to accelerate the process. We recorded their arguments. With the house sale closing and Arthur still alive, Isabella was growing frantic. David, now a brilliant actor in his own right, would play the part of the worried, weak-willed husband, his questions designed to get her to reveal her plans. What if he does not die before the closing? Bella, he would ask. What is the plan then? And she, in her arrogance, would tell him. The closing on the house was now just a week away. Arthur's health, miraculously, had begun to stabilize. David, under the secret guidance of a toxicologist, Frank had put him in touch with had been meticulously diluting the poison tonic, replacing most of it with a harmless herbal blend. Isabella was in a full-blown panic. Her plan was falling apart. Her victim was not dying on schedule. The money from the house was about to arrive. But her husband, the man whose death was supposed to unlock the $2 million life insurance payout, was getting better. The final, damning recording came on a Tuesday night. David, in a masterful performance, provoked a confrontation. "It is not working, Bella," he said, his voice a convincing imitation of a panicked accomplice. "He is getting stronger. We need a new plan." "I have a new plan. You fool," she hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper that the recorder captured with perfect clarity. "Forget the poison. It is too slow. The day after the closing, we are taking him on a trip. A celebratory trip to the coast. To get some sea air. A tragic accident. A slip from a cliff during a seaside walk. It is quick. It is clean. And no one will question the grief of a widow whose husband just had a miraculous recovery and then suffered a terrible, terrible fall." It was the final piece. A clear, premeditated, an explicit confession of a new murder plot. David delivered the recording to Frank that night. The next morning, I received the call from my lawyer. "We have her. Elizabeth," Marcus Thorne's voice said, a low hum of triumphant finality. "We have it all. The district attorney has everything they need. The trap is set. Not for a trip to the coast. For the closing." The morning of the closing was a masterpiece of surreal, deceptive calm. I allowed the nursing home staff to dress me, playing the part of the frail, compliant woman whose life was now managed by others. I was a lamb being led to the final shearing, or so it appeared. Inside, my mind was a cold, clear, and perfectly functioning laboratory of a plan that was about to reach its explosive conclusion. The car ride to the downtown law office was a final, agonizing performance. I was seated in the back with David, who played the part of the dutiful, caring son, his hand resting on mine in a gesture of false comfort. His guilt was a palpable thing, a sour and heavy odor in the car. Isabella sat in the front, a vision of chic, professional elegance, her phone buzzing with what she believed were messages from her bankers. But what I knew were updates from the police surveillance team, tracking her every move. She was triumphant. She was on the verge of acquiring a multi-million-dollar property, of solving all her financial problems, and of permanently silencing her two greatest obstacles, her ailing husband and his meddlesome wife. "Are you ready for your new, quiet life, Elizabeth?" she asked, her eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror, her smile a flash of brilliant, predatory condescension. "No more stress. No more big, complicated decisions. We will take care of everything from now on." "I am ready for the conclusion, Isabella," I replied, my voice a quiet, neutral whisper. She heard a surrender. She had no idea she was hearing a final, damning verdict. The conference room of the law firm was a sterile, intimidating space of glass and polished wood on the 40th floor. The closing attorney, a man with a plastic smile, was there. The buyers, two grim-faced, professional-looking men who were, I knew, undercover police detectives, were also present. The room was a stage, and it was under full audio and video surveillance. The documents were laid out, a thick stack of papers that represented the legal death of my old life. I played my role one final time. The confused, elderly woman, overwhelmed by the process. I would ask simple, repetitive questions. Isabella, sitting beside me, was a model of patient, condescending guidance. She would point to the signature lines, her voice a soothing balm of lies. David hovered behind us, a ghost at the execution. Finally, the moment came. The closing attorney pushed the final, most important document in front of me, the deed transfer. If you will just sign here. Mrs. Holloway, he said, the transaction will be complete. I picked up the pen. I held it over the signature line. I saw the triumphant, greedy gleam in Isabella's eyes. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the culmination of her entire monstrous plan. And then, with a slow, deliberate movement, I set the pen down. Before I sign, I said, my voice, no longer the frail whisper they were used to, but the clear, I'm steady, and authoritative voice of a research scientist. I have a question about my husband's medical care. The atmosphere in the room changed in an instant. David went pale. Isabella's smile froze on her face. I was a research chemist for 40 years. I continued. My gaze locked on Isabella. I am intimately familiar with toxicology. So perhaps you can explain to me, from a scientific perspective, why my husband's blood contains a level of methanol that is consistent with chronic, deliberate poisoning. The word poisoning hung in the air like a particle of fallout. The room was utterly silent. What are you talking about? Isabella finally stammered. Her voice a strained, ugly thing. She is having an episode. She is delusional. We have the medical records. Ah, yes. The medical records, I said, my voice cold as ice. The ones fabricated by your associate, Dr. Finch. We will get to him later. I did not take my eyes off her. But your methods are what truly interest me. It seems you have a pattern. As if on cue, the conference room door opened. My investigator, Frank Chen, walked in. He was not alone. He was with a quiet, sad-eyed woman in her late 50s. Isabella, Frank said, his voice calm and final. I believe you know Mrs. Albright. Her maiden name was Jensen. She is the sister of your first husband, the late Mr. Anyone, Alan Jensen. Isabella stared at the woman as if she were seeing a ghost, her face a mask of pure, horrified disbelief. My brother, Alan, Mrs. Albright said, her voice trembling but clear, died 10 years ago. From what the doctors called a sudden, aggressive, and undiagnosed neurological disorder. He had been so healthy. And then he met her. She pointed a shaking finger at Isabella. The symptoms, the confusion, the fatigue, and the vision problems. He said all the colors were fading. I never understood. But now, I do. It would seem, I said, my voice a quiet, final verdict, that you have been perfecting your methodology for a very long time. Isabella, my husband was not your first experiment. This is a lie. A conspiracy. Isabella shrieked, her carefully constructed composure shattering into 1,000 pieces. She looked at David, her eyes wild. Tell them, David. Tell them she is a crazy, vengeful old woman. But David was no longer her ally. He was staring at her, his face a mask of dawning, absolute horror, as the full, monstrous truth of the woman he had married finally crashed down upon him. You did this, he whispered. You were poisoning him all along. As her world imploded, Isabella made one last, desperate move. It was a scientist, and her final act was one of pure, destructive rage. Then perhaps we should discuss my new plan, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper as I delivered the final blow. I placed a small audio player on the table, the one for my celebratory trip to the coast after the closing. I pressed play. Her own voice, cold, clear, and utterly damning, filled the room. A tragic accident. A slip from a cliff during a seaside walk. It is quick. It is clean. And no one will question the grief of a widow whose husband just had a miraculous recovery and then suffered a terrible, terrible fall. At the sound of her own words, a raw, inhuman scream of pure rage tore from her throat. The struggle was not a lunge for the documents. It was a primal, explosive act of violence. She lunged at me, her hands clawed, her face a mask of pure, murderous intent. But she never reached me. The two buyers at the table moved with a speed that was anything but that of businessmen. They intercepted her, tackling her to the ground, their movements swift and professional. "Police," one of them shouted. "You are under arrest." The doors to the conference room burst open, and the room was filled with uniformed officers. The trap had been sprung. The alliance, the partnership of a mastermind and her pawn, shattered in a final, ugly spectacle. As the detectives pulled a screaming, fighting Isabella to her feet, David, completely broken, turned on her. "You are a monster," he sobbed. "You used me. You were going to kill my mother. You were killing my father. You were a means to an end. You pathetic, weak-willed fool." She spat back at him, her face a contortion of pure venom. "You were the easiest mark I ever found." They were still screaming at each other as the police led them away in separate directions. The corrupt doctor, Finch, I would learn later, had been arrested in a coordinated raid at his office at the very same moment. I stood in the silent, sterile conference room, the unsigned papers still on the table. My son was a broken man. My husband was still in a hospital bed, his future uncertain. But the monster was in a cage. The chemist, the quiet, retired old woman, had finally, and at a terrible cost, published her findings. The explosion of the climax was followed by a grim, methodical silence. As Isabella was led away in handcuffs, her face a mask of furious disbelief, the sleek conference room was transformed into a crime scene. My son, David, had collapsed into a chair, his body racked with deep, agonizing sobs, the sound of a man whose entire world had been revealed as a monstrous, murderous lie. I, on the other hand, felt a strange, cold calm. The chemist in me had taken over. The experiment was over. Now began the long, painstaking process of analyzing the results. The immediate focus shifted to my husband. The police, working with my investigator Frank Chen, had a medical team waiting on standby. An ambulance, its lights silent, was waiting at the curb. They rushed to the house, where a private nurse, hired by Frank, had been discreetly monitoring Arthur. They found him weak and confused, but alive. He was transported to the hospital, not as a dying man, but as the victim of a crime. His room immediately secured as a protected space. The news of the Holloway poisoning plot became a massive local and national scandal. The story was a chilling trifecta of high society greed, medical malpractice, and intimate betrayal. The beautiful, sainted daughter-in-law was revealed to be a monster. The grieving mother-in-law, a quiet, brilliant hero, and the respected psychiatrist, a criminal accomplice. My quiet, private life was over, but in its place, the truth, in all its ugly, horrifying glory, had finally been brought into the light. The legal process was a slow, grinding machine, but its conclusion was as inevitable as a chemical reaction. The evidence against Isabella and her co-conspirator, Dr. Finch, was an insurmountable mountain. The toxicology reports on Arthur's blood were the scientific centerpiece of the case. A clear, undeniable chemical fingerprint of chronic methanol poisoning. My secret recordings provided the narrative. The cold, chilling proof of their conspiracy, in their own words. The financial investigation, led by Frank Chen, laid bare Isabella's desperate motive, a secret life of staggering gambling debts and a string of failed, fraudulent investments. The most powerful testimony came from the sister of Isabella's first husband, Alan Jensen. Her tearful account of her brother's mysterious, similar decline, combined with new evidence Frank had uncovered, led the New York authorities to exhume his body. The autopsy, conducted with the knowledge of what to look for, found trace evidence of long-term poisoning. The verdicts were a clean sweep of justice. Dr. Alistair Finch, the corrupt psychiatrist, was convicted of felony medical fraud and conspiracy. His medical license was revoked, and he was sentenced to a long prison term. His name, forever a stain on the medical community he had so expertly manipulated. Isabella was a creature from a different rocks, darker world. She was convicted of the attempted murder of my husband, Arthur, and the first-degree murder of her first husband, Alan Jensen, in addition to a litany of fraud and conspiracy charges. She was defiant, remorseless, and utterly devoid of humanity to the very end. The judge, calling her a cancer on the very idea of family and care, sentenced her to 2 consecutive life sentences, without the possibility of parole. She would die in prison, a fate she had so callously planned for others. While the legal system dealt with the criminals, my family was left to deal with the wreckage. Arthur's recovery was the central, all-consuming focus of our new lives. He had survived, a fact the doctors called a miracle. But the poison had taken a terrible fine, lasting toll. The methanol had caused significant, irreversible damage to his optic nerves, leaving him with permanently impaired vision. He was frail, his body ravaged by the long-term toxic assault. But his mind, the brilliant, a beautiful mind I had fallen in love with, slowly, painstakingly, began to return. David's recovery was a different, more complicated journey. He was not charged with a crime, the district attorney having determined that he was a victim of profound psychological manipulation, not a willing co-conspirator. But he was a broken man, consumed by a guilt and self-loathing that was a prison of its own. He dedicated himself, with a quiet, desperate fervor, to his father's care. He became Arthur's eyes, reading to him for hours on end. He became his strength, helping him with his physical therapy. His service was an act of profound, unspoken atonement. His relationship with me was a ruin. For months, we barely spoke. The shame was a wall between us. The healing began one evening, as he was helping me in the kitchen. "Mom," he said, his voice a low, broken whisper, "I do not expect you to ever forgive me. But I want you to know that I will spend the rest of my life trying to be a son that you and Dad could have been proud of." "I know, David," I said, my voice quiet. "That is a good place to start." It was not forgiveness. It was not an absolution. But it was a beginning. A single, fragile thread from which a new, more honest relationship could one day be woven. We did not stay in the old house. The memories were too heavy. The ghosts too real. We sold it and bought a new home. A modern, light-filled house on a quiet stretch of the coast. A place of clean lines and wide-open views of the ocean. It was a house designed for a new life, for healing. My own life was reborn with a new purpose. My quiet retirement was over. I had been a witness to a form of evil so insidious, so hidden, that I knew I could not simply return to my quiet life in the greenhouse. With the help of my investigator, Frank Chen, and a portion of our recovered fortune, I established the Holloway Foundation for Patient Advocacy. Our mission was to fight for the victims of medical gaslighting and familial financial abuse, to be the investigators for those who had no voice, to be the scientific proof for those whose truths were being dismissed as delusions. My work as a chemist, once a solitary pursuit of knowledge, was now a public service. I had seen the darkest application of science, and I would now spend the rest of my life ensuring that its light was used for protection, for healing, and for justice. Today is October 4th. It is the anniversary of the day the for sale sign was hammered into the lawn of our old home. The day my dispossession felt total, and my despair was at its deepest. I am sitting in my new greenhouse. It is not just a place for my old Max, familiar plants. It has become a specialized conservatory, a living library of rare and wonderful botanicals. In the center, in a place of honor, is a collection of rare, medicinal orchids and herbs I have had sourced from the remote, beautiful central highlands of Vietnam, a testament to the healing power that can be found in the authentic, natural world. Arthur is sitting with me. He is frail, and his vision is poor, but his mind is as sharp and as beautiful as ever. We sit in a comfortable, quiet companionship. David is visiting this afternoon with his wife and their new baby, my grandchild. He is a good man now, a kind, humble, and attentive father. He is a man who has looked into the abyss of his own weakness and has found his way back. Our love is not the same as it was, but it is stronger, for it is now forged in the unbreakable alloy of truth. I often think about my life as a chemist. I know that some elements are inert and harmless, while others, like methanol, are reactive, toxic, and destructive. I have learned, in the most painful way possible, that the same is true of love. Unconditional, blind, untested love can be a poison, a thing that enables weakness and invites predation. But a love that is clear-eyed, that is vigilant, that is willing to fight for the truth, that is the ultimate antidote. My family was nearly destroyed by a counterfeit love, but we were saved by a real one. And that is a scientific fact for which I will be forever and profoundly grateful.